Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. I'm Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State. We are only 47 days away from Election Day. It's an intense election. We all know that. We all feel that. And that's okay. It's okay to be intense. It's okay for people to have strong feelings and passions about this or that office or this about this or that candidate. But we just want to make sure that that intensity is channeled in a positive direction and not in a destructive direction. I've said many times over the last several months that I have two big wishes between now and Election Day. If I could wave a magic wand in this room right now, I would wish for two things between now and November 5th. I want to see high turnout and low drama. That's what I want to see. And we're going to talk about some of that today. One essential component for both of those outcomes, that is high turnout and low drama, is to make sure that Minnesotans have the information they need about our elections. So starting tomorrow, which is Friday, September 20th, voting will begin across Minnesota for the November 5th general election. It will be early voting by absentee ballot. That is the final phase of our election process, and it's really why we're here today. I'm joined by Acting Elections Director Paul Linnell, Election Security Navigator Bill Ekblad, and Voter Outreach Director Melanie Hazelip. They will talk about the work they are doing with our many partners across the state to make sure that Minnesotans continue to enjoy elections that are fair, accurate, honest, and secure. Now, first, I want to let Minnesotans know that now is the time to make their plan to vote. We have a proud tradition in Minnesota of leading the nation in voter turnout. We were number one in America for 3 out of the last 4 elections, and I'd like to see us get back to number one again this year. There are 3 basic ways to vote in Minnesota. First is early by mail, starting tomorrow, where you order the ballot to come to you. Second is early in person, typically at a city or county office in that early voting period that starts tomorrow. And third, of course, is in person on Election Day at a designated polling place. This year, there will be even more opportunities to vote early in person on special weekend hours in the weekends leading up to November 5th. You can learn all about how to vote and what those rules are on our website, mnvotes.gov. It's a great one-stop shop. Remember, that website is where you can not only register to vote, you can order the ballot to come to you, you can find out what the rules are, you can even look up what candidates are running in your area for what offices. So it's a great one-stop shop, mnvotes.gov. So this is a message we'll be amplifying throughout our Here We Vote campaign that you're going to hear about. You'll see messages on social media about Here We Vote, and we have a great TV ad in the works, a public service announcement. It's in production, so I can't say much more about that, but we think that Minnesotans are going to love it. You'll see that on TV, you'll see radio, or you'll hear radio, and you'll start seeing the social media activity sometime in October. So just a note on all the math around voting rates. It will be harder, a little bit harder for Minnesota to get back to the number one spot this year, but for all the right reasons. And that is that we've added 55,000 eligible voters to our democracy. So the denominator has gotten bigger by 55,000 people. Now, folks in Minnesota who have left prison behind can vote again. That's approximately 55,000 people. So as long as you are otherwise eligible, if you are 18, if you're a US citizen, if you are a Minnesota resident, if you are not currently incarcerated, if you meet those descriptions, you can vote. And that's new for this presidential election year, of course. So we're following in the footsteps of more than 20 other states with this kind of change, including our neighbor North Dakota, who has had this law on the books for many years. Another important reason for people to make their plan to vote now is that we are seeing some delays nationally with the US Postal Service. It's not everywhere, and Minnesota has fared better than many places across the country. But we just want to make sure that if you plan to vote by mail from home, that you're requesting your ballot and returning your ballot early. Remember, the rule in Minnesota is all ballots have to be back to whoever sent it to you. Look at the return address on the envelope, whether it was a township or a city or a county. Whoever sent it to you, you have to get it back by the close of polls on Election Day, by 8 p.m. on Election Day. We're not a postmark state. Others are, like California and several others. We are not. So it's not a question of when you postmark it, it's when the ballot arrives. And you can either mail it back, and if you mail it back, of course, we have a tracking code, just like a UPS package or just like an Amazon package. So no voter in Minnesota has to pop it in the mail, say a prayer, and just hope it's going to get there in time. You can know with certainty that it got there in time by tracking that ballot, but it's got to get back by 8 p.m. on election day to be counted. Now, in our office, we always talk about the balance of making our elections accessible and secure. Those are the two really guiding principles. You want accessibility and you want security. You want both. So I want to remind Minnesotans of some of the security measures that we've had in place for many years in this state. First, we always use paper ballots. Just think about that. There's been a lot of misinformation about elections equipment and tabulators, but remember, the ultimate backup is paper. We don't put fingers on a keyboard like an ATM machine or anything else. We have paper that you can touch and feel and see, and that we have to keep for 2 years under lock and key after every single election. So that's a great backup. In addition, all local election offices must, under state perfect, every precinct must ensure that there are the same number of ballots as registered voters. There can be no discrepancy. And after election night, the work isn't over. All localities will conduct an audit to ensure that the elections equipment worked perfect accuracy. And all of these steps ensure that our elections are free, fair, secure, and accurate. So there's more to say. At this point, I want to hand it over to Acting Elections Director Paul Linnell, and he's going to talk about the work of his team in preparation for November 5th. Mr. Linnell.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. My name is Paul Linnell, and I'm the Acting State Elections Director. I've been with the office since 2022, and previously I was the elections lead in Anoka County. In Minnesota, our elections are conducted locally at the counties, cities, and townships across the state. Our team has been working around the clock to ensure that all our local election officials have the support that they need and are prepared for the election. The work of election officials is far more than one day in November. Elections take year-round preparations, and now we're starting to see all of the planning and training in action. Starting tomorrow, local election offices will welcome in-person absentee voters, and absentee ballots will be mailed out to voters who have requested them, including those on the permanent absentee list. One of the key responsibilities of our local election administration partners is registering eligible Minnesota voters. If you're not registered yet, now is the time to do it. It's quick and it's easy. Go to mnvotes.gov/register and you can register to vote online. You can also check your voter registration status there to confirm that you're registered to vote. Our pre-election registration deadline is October 15th. Otherwise, you can register to vote on election day. I also want to take this time to remind everyone about some of the laws for polling places. Only certain authorized people can be in the polling place. With limited exceptions, this includes voters and their voucher or assistant of their choosing if needed, election judges, authorized challengers appointed by a political party or a candidate, and credentialed media. Minnesota law also prohibits campaigning within 100 feet of a polling place. This prohibition also includes displaying of a name, logo, or slogan of a political party or candidate on the ballot. Each statewide election, Minnesota needs approximately 30,000 election workers. Many of those positions are for temporary election judges. Serving as an election judge is a chance to learn about elections and is a great service to the community. In Minnesota, we've always had enough election workers, even in 2020, and we want to continue that trend. Much of the recruiting and hiring of election judges across the state is complete, but some locations are still looking to fill their final positions. To be an election judge, you must be eligible to vote in Minnesota and able to read, write, and speak English. Students 16 and 17 years old can be election judge trainees with permission from their parents and their school. If people are interested in serving as an election judge now or in the future, they should reach out to their local election office. We have all the details on our website, again, mnvotes.gov. And now I'll hand it over to our election security navigator, Bill Ekblad.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning. As Paul mentioned, I'm Bill Ekblad, the Election Security Navigator with the Secretary of State's office. I've been in this role since 2019. Our Election Security Navigator team partners closely with a wide range of state and federal agencies and local election offices across Minnesota to monitor physical and cyber threats to our elections. As recent national headlines affirm, we enter the run-up to the November 5th general election in a highly charged threat environment. As has been the case since the 2016 presidential election, foreign cyber actors remain focused on attempting to affect and influence our elections. Recent assassination attempts against a major party presidential candidate emphasize the way that political division and extreme rhetoric can spill over to physical violence. And finally, just this week, we were again reminded of the potential for mail-borne threats in the form of elections mail containing white powdery substances to threaten the safety of already overstressed local election workers. We've clearly got our work cut out for us over the next 47 days and likely beyond, preparing for these types of threats and likely others that we can't yet predict. However, we believe strongly that the security relationships that we've established with our partners over the last several years will ensure that we collectively deliver safe and secure elections to the people of Minnesota. And with that, I'll turn it over to our voter outreach director, Melanie Hazelip. Melanie?
Thank you, Bill. My name is Melanie Hazelip. I'm the voter outreach director, and I've been with this office since 2022. As people will hear over the course of the next few months, Here We Vote is all about making sure Minnesotans get out to vote. We have 3 ways to vote in Minnesota starting tomorrow: early voting by mail, early voting in person, and of course, voting on election day at your local polling place. To vote early by mail, you can go to mnvotes.gov or your local election office to request your absentee ballot be mailed directly to you. Then you can sit down and fill it out at your kitchen table and mail it back to the office that sent it to you. You can also track your ballot, like Secretary Simon said, once you've mailed it in, to follow it all the way through the process to ensure that it is received at your local election office. Anyone can vote early by mail for any reason at all. We call it no excuse absentee voting. And this year, you have the option to get on the permanent absentee voter list. So if a voter wishes to always be mailed an absentee ballot, they can get on that list, and for every election, a ballot will be mailed directly to them. Like Secretary Simon said, just make sure that your ballot is received at your local election office by 8 p.m. on election day. You can also vote early in person starting tomorrow. Go to mnvotes.gov to find out where, and in the weeks leading up to the election, there will be extended early voting in person hours on the weekends prior to the election. Many Minnesotans discovered the convenience and the ease of voting early by mail and in person in recent years, and we do continue the numbers to continue to rise. But still, a lot of voters prefer to go to their local polling place on election day to cast their ballot. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And a reminder, as long as you're in line by 8 p.m., you can vote, so stay in line. Use our poll finder tool at mnvotes.gov to find your local polling place. mnvotes.gov is really the one-stop shop to find all of the information you need about how, when, and where to vote. For years, Minnesotans have relied on those online interactive tools to get them the answers that they need: to register to vote, to check their registration, to request an absentee ballot, and to track their ballot. We've heard how useful these tools are to so many, and I'm excited to share that these tools are now available in 11 different languages. They're available in English, Spanish, Hmong, Somali, Vietnamese, Russian, Chinese, Lao, Oromo, Khmer, and Amharic. All of these tools are available at mnvotes.gov. As Secretary Simon said, in Minnesota, in order to vote, you must be a United States citizen, 18 years or older, a resident of Minnesota for 20 days, not incarcerated for a felony conviction, and you cannot have had your right to vote revoked by a judge. Lastly, I want to remind folks that we have an elections call center that voters can call right now. It's currently taking calls. When you call in our call center, you will always get a live person on the phone to answer your questions. Just call 1-877-600-VOTE, 1-877-600-8683 to reach our elections call center. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Secretary Simon, then, this is sort of in your capacity as president of the National Association of Secretaries of State. Have you been satisfied with the assurances that you've been getting from the U.S. Postal Service about prompt delivery of ballots.
That is an ongoing discussion. We have had some recent contact with the Postmaster General. We wrote a letter, that I'm sure you're referring to that, in the last week or so, expressing disappointment with their initial response to our concerns about primarily two areas. One was just speed of mail, because as I mentioned, in Minnesota and many other states, there's a clear deadline, and the difference of even 1 day delay can mean the difference between a vote counting and not counting. So the stakes are high. And number two, a spike seemingly in the number of deliveries that are returned in error as undeliverable. In other words, they're returned as undeliverable even though the person really does live there and the address was correct. It was a mistake. It was a human error. And so we have talked recently with the Postmaster General. I, accept his intention to really focus on these issues over the next 47 days. What I and others have suggested is additional training, additional resources, if possible, and recommendations about who in our respective states we ought to be talking to. And I just want to say something about that's Minnesota specific. 2020 was the ultimate stress test when it came to the mail and the number of people choosing to vote by mail. We had a huge spike in Minnesota and everywhere else I'm aware of in the country because of COVID. And in 2020, because of a lot of good communication, we were able to overcome some of these challenges. So the reason I'm somewhat optimistic is if we could handle, and if the USPS could handle 2020 with that massive volume of mail and voting by mail, then surely they can handle the challenges this year. I hope they will. My hope and expectation is that the USPS will do the things that we have recommended and do them quickly over the next 47 days, because the stakes really are high for individual voters. And maybe this is an opportunity for me to say what I don't think any of us have said, which is our all-purpose advice for Minnesota voters. If you're returning a ballot that you received by mail, and that you're returning it by mail, our all-purpose advice is just to be safe, give yourself at least a week. At least a week. You have to exercise your own judgment based on your own area and what you detect about mail patterns, and that's not for me to say. It could be different in Owatonna or Duluth or Bemidji or wherever. But the all-purpose general advice is give yourself at least a week, even if the place you're mailing it to is just down the street. To be safe, give yourself at least a week.
Secretary, can you talk about this litigation that settled in the state's favor regarding the false statements about voter eligibility?
Yeah.
I'm wondering what level of speech do you think that is intended to cover? Meaning, if I say, I think the Supreme Court erred in their ruling on felon voting. I think the state constitution is clear that the law is unconstitutional. Can you draw me in court?
No, not at all. No, it's not matters of opinion. It's matters of fact that are spread with some intent to spread them, some idea that they're knowingly false and spreading them knowing that they're false. It's not someone who inadvertently passes along a rumor or a myth that they may have heard that they truly believe is true. The neighbor over the fence post told them something. It's not true. They trust that neighbor. They passed it along. It's not meant for that. It's meant for the knowing dissemination of false information that's material to voting. And it's really no different, and this is what the lawyers were arguing in the case, it's no different than the way that we regulate corporate or commercial speech, right? No company has the right to make an unfounded claim about its product. You don't have a First Amendment right to say that, your chewing gum cures cancer or whatever it is, right? So it's the same kind of thing. It's knowingly false. There's an intent element to it.
It was well within 60 days of the election.
Right.
Have you seen any activity that you think rises to this level?
Hard to answer that question. We get reports from time to time. I'm thinking about one recently that we got. It's possible. Not on a large scale that I've seen so far, but we've had some people suggest that people are saying things that could fall in. I guess it depends on intent. So I never know whether it's just the person passing along the thing they heard, or it's someone by design spreading something that they know is false.
Can you talk about the review done by DPS a couple last week regarding the voters?
Right. So just to level set here, this is about automatic voter registration. We were made aware this summer of a glitch, and let me be clear that the law is crystal clear. The law says this has to be airtight, and that the only records that the Department of Public Safety is supposed to send over to our office, with no exception, are records that have been reviewed for the production of certain documentation. And in a limited number of cases, that wasn't done. So we asked the Department of Public Safety, and they graciously accepted the invitation, that they need to do a hand check of every single person. This isn't a sample. Oh, we'll sample some percentage. No, each and every record we asked them, and they did. You have to check each and every one. And we asked them, and they did, to implement a new policy so that now there are two sets of eyes, I should say, two sets of eyes, not one, that is reviewing every record so that we don't have these kinds of glitches. And look, it's got to be airtight. The statute is clear that it must be airtight. The people of Minnesota have every right to expect that it's airtight. And what I intend with our partners to deliver is a system that's airtight. That's what we have to do.
Who are the two sets of eyes?
Oh, two people at the department, I don't know, at the Department of Public Safety.
Just
The folks at the counter, so people transacting the business of getting or renewing a driver's license. It's the folks in their department. I can't get into any more detail than that, but you'd have to ask them. But they're going to, they assure us, have now two sets of eyes, not just one human being, but two human beings that will review every such application.
Just a two-part question here. First, to set the record straight, did any of those ineligible voters cast a ballot in the primary? And the second part of that, if they had, what would be the process there?
The answer is no. No ineligible voters cast a record in the primary. After that hand review that they did of about 100,000 records, which was every single one, not a sample, not a little bit, but they reviewed comprehensively every one. There's no evidence that anyone voted, which is a good thing. And it's good that they caught that error when they did and not later. But what we did in an abundance of caution was, when we got that limited number of folks who shouldn't have been forwarded to us, we inactivated all their records right away. We didn't even wait for the counties to do it. They could have done it. We didn't want to wait. We did it. So that's how we respond to that sort of thing when we know about it.
How did this glitch get discovered? Was it internally or was it externally?
I think, and others, maybe Mr. Linnell and others can talk about it because he was in on some of the meetings, but I think it's sort of a combination. And Paul, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I know the first point that we were made aware that there was an issue was each individual that's registered through the automatic voter registration process is sent an opt-out form, where if they don't wish to be registered to vote, or certainly if they're not an eligible voter for any reason, they would want to return that form to be opted out. And we did have a return to opt-out notice to us that indicated that the voter was not eligible to vote. And so that struck up the conversation and the process with DBS to begin this review and implement the additional steps that Secretary Simon laid out.
Can you provide assurances that because of this glitch, there won't be anybody who's ineligible voting in the November election?
I have every reason to believe that the steps that the Department of Public Safety has adopted will lead to that outcome. In other words, that we won't have the kind of glitch we saw, and that we won't have someone inadvertently or otherwise who's not supposed to vote voting. And again, just to repeat, there's no evidence, despite the literal review of every record that they did, that happened in the primary, and there's no reason to suppose it will happen in the general election, when we'll have even stronger reviews in place.
Mr. Secretary, could you briefly explain the process of vouching? And then after that, address whether or not you were at all concerned that any type of fraud can happen during that process?
Yes, vouching. So Minnesota is one of several states that has something called vouching. And just to zoom out a little bit, when you register to vote, it's basically all that means when we talk about registration is two things. It doesn't mean 20 things or 8 things or even 3. It only means 2. It means that the person has to show that they are who they say they are, and they live where they say they live. That's all that voter registration means. On the live where you say you live part, we have vouching, meaning if somebody doesn't have what they would otherwise be able to use to show that, yes, I live at 123 Maple Street, they can have a neighbor, someone in their precinct is technically it, which is usually a cluster of neighborhoods or a neighborhood. In their precinct, they can, under penalty of perjury, vouch, yes, he lives at 123 Maple Street. I know a little something about this because in the 1998 election, the Jesse Ventura election, some of you remember, my father voted via vouching. My parents had just downsized from the house that I grew up in, moved to a condo, and they moved in the fall. I think it was even October. They didn't have a utility bill yet. Their driver's licenses still said the old address. So they had nothing at that point that said that they lived at their new condo. And so my dad could not have voted in the 1998 election unless he had a neighbor vouch for him. So that's how it works.
Mr. Secretary, there was some revelations this week and last of what appear to be Democratic national operatives recruiting and doing signature gathering for candidates to appear on the ballot, in this case, the second congressional. Apparently legally, right? They got their 1,000 signatures, this person's on the ballot. You have a situation in the state where legitimate third parties try and fail to get 1,000 signatures
Right.
on the ballot. And here you have a national operation coming in, putting people on your/our ballot who otherwise would not.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that? What you think about that?
Well, I'll just say this generally. I don't know so much about that case. I did see the headline. I scanned it. What we don't want is trickery in our election system of any party on any part of the political spectrum. What we have to concern ourselves with in our office is honestly not so much that, because we're not the campaign cops at all. That's others do that work. We just have to do the signature verification. So I'm just going to leave it there because we leave it there. That's all that we do.
Well, you're an elected official in the
Mhm.
state of Minnesota. You can have opinions about
Oh yeah, no.
beyond the legal duties of your office.
No, I would just say, and I don't know the detail, I just don't know the facts of this. I would just say, generally speaking, and we've seen it all over the political spectrum from time to time, without commenting on a specific incident, because I just am not competent to comment in terms of knowing all the facts. You don't want trickery where people are placed on the ballot not because they want to run for office, but because they want to influence the outcome in some other way.
The Democratic legislature thought this was such a significant issue that they changed election laws regarding major party status, as they said, in an attempt to stop shenanigans from the right. So it was an issue in my session. I know you did not take a position on it.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about that? And is the two-person review, is that just an automatic voter thing, or does that also apply to same-day registration?
I'm going to ask Mr. Linnell to comment on that one.
So the secondary review that's taking place is part of this process change with DVS as part of the automatic voter registration process. That has been stood up following the implementation of the 2023 law requiring that citizenship affirming documentation be presented before a person can be registered. So that's that threshold where this additional layer of review is really critical because of those legal requirements that only those persons who have presented that documentation make their way to our office for registration purposes. Other voters who are registering prior to election day online, on paper on election day, are all completing that voter registration application. They are actively choosing to be registered to vote and affirming their eligibility to vote, again, under perjury as part of that process.
Oh, out of the millions of illegal immigrants that passed over our border and who now reside here in Minnesota, you can guarantee that not one of them are going to vote?
Well, let's look in the rearview mirror in order to answer that question. So a fresh, newly released study this summer by a professor at the University of St. Thomas, published in July. In fact, he wrote an op-ed summarizing his findings in the Star Tribune. He looked at 9 years worth of Minnesota voting records from 2015 to the present. So 9 years worth. I think it was 13.4 million votes were cast. He found three out of 13.4 million. Now, we all want it to be zero. I want it to be zero. That 3 is 3 too many. But let's put it in some rational perspective. That's a really small microscopic number. So based on that, while no one can ever claim or predict perfection, and I won't here, I think we've got the protections in place to make sure that only eligible voters are voting across all categories.
But in the last 3 years, there's been several million people that came in. So that kind of brings up to the forefront, rather than the St. Thomas guy who did it for the last, 10 years? So we're talking now here today.
Yeah. Same thing. It's because we have the protections in place. And keep in mind that doing that is not only a deportable felony, but it's a permanent bar to citizenship. The stakes are really, really high. And, it's a big roll of the dice to do something like that, which is why I suspect it is very, very rarely done in Minnesota.
All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thanks all.